Hey everybody, welcome back to Cosmic Life Astrology. Today we are talking about Mercury Retrograde. So first I want to start out by thanking all of my subscribers. I really appreciate each and every one of you. If you're not already subscribed, please do so. Hit that like button, comment, and share this video if you enjoyed it. So I want to also preface that this week, between the Thanksgiving holiday and it being my birthday week, there's a lot of festivities going on, and I'm not sure when my next video will come out. I know we have the Sag new moon happening, and I do want to talk about that with you guys. I'm just not sure when I'll be able to fit in videoing that for you, but I will do my best. So let's talk about Mercury retrograde. This is going to be an interesting one. I've made a lot of notes. I've been looking at the chart over and over for a couple of weeks because I know for me personally, this is hitting a lot of points in my chart, and I've been very curious as to what to expect. And there's a lot of things to talk about. So I like to always start out by talking about or mentioning past cycles. The last time we saw Mercury retrograde in Sag was December of last year. And when that happened, Mercury was at 6 degrees of Capricorn and retrograded back to 22 degrees of Sagittarius. Why am I bringing this up? Because the Mercury retrograde this year begins at 22 degrees of Sag and ends at 6 degrees of Sag. Now, where the retrograde began last year and where it ends this year is 30 degrees apart. 6 degrees Cap, 6 degrees Sag. And to me, that foretells something coming to a culmination, something being finalized, which that theme has been playing out throughout the past few months especially, but there's some significance to that, and I don't want that to go ignored because there may be some correlation to what you saw being reviewed or discussed last year during the retrograde cycle, or something that needs to be finalized, that you may have thought you were finalizing it last year, but it has to get revisited to really firm things up. So that is important to take note of. See if there's, any relation to what was transpiring during December of last year, and even shortly after when the retrograde ended, and what is coming back up this year as the retrograde cycles begins, especially because of that 22 degree Sag mark. All right, so that degree is a hot spot between last year and this year, and that's why there's going to be some kind of similarities, some relation to last year versus this year. It'll play out differently for everybody. But I also want to talk about Mars. Mars is also a key player in this Mercury retrograde cycle. When Mercury shadow began, Mars was opposing Pluto in Capricorn at the anaretic degree of 29 degrees Capricorn. And Mars will be trining the North Node during the Mercury retrograde cycle. So that means that we're going to get a push to move forward. And that is going to be support that is needed during this cycle. Mars likes to take action and go after what it's passionate about. Mars is not afraid to fight for what's right, especially in Leo. Mars can be very, very leader-like in Leo. And the North Node is going to pull us forward, right? North Node in Aries is having us, honor what's good for us individually. And as Mercury retrograde begins, we have a Grand Fire Trine taking place between Mars, the North Node, and the Sun. So that Grand Fire Trine is going to highlight something that's going to bring opportunity for us to move forward and move ahead. And we will see this play out again when Mercury retrograde ends with another fire trine. This time it will be with Mars, Mercury, and the North Node. So by the time the Mercury retrograde cycle ends, I think that difference between the Sun and Mercury is the Sun highlights an opportunity, right? And Mercury may just be that final decision, that final, signing on the dotted line. And so take note, because we have very good opportunities for us during this time, but it is going to be a little tricky to navigate. The reason being is we have not only the Mercury retrograde cycle happening, within the same week, we have the Sag new moon at 9 degrees, which is a degree that Mercury is going to cross over during the retrograde cycle. And then Mercury retrograde ends with a full moon in Gemini, opposing the same spot that Mercury retrograde began. So there's going to be a change up to the story. There likely will be some kind of change of plans that happens during, between the beginning of the Mercury retrograde cycle and the end of the cycle, because of the full moon, especially being in that opposite point of the chart where the retrograde began. So, say you're thinking about making plans to travel, there may be a change to those plans. You may travel somewhere different, or, there may be a change to when you're traveling. If you're looking to make a change within your job, there could be, you may start out the retrograde cycle thinking that you're going to pursue one thing and end up somewhere different. And that would be, different for a reason. Maybe what you originally were pursuing was not in line with your goals for your career. Or, if you're having discussions within relationships, there could be, a culmination of those decisions and discussions within your relationship on, what your plan is together. And if you're single, this could be a time where, that can change as well. Because of oppositions that are happening during the cycle, it's very much relational. Oppositions usually mean that there's another person involved that's opposing, and causing a little bit of strain or stress, or some kind of decision or challenge that needs to be overcome. And we also have, a lot of emphasis on talking and the details, because we have Jupiter being the ruler of Mercury retrograde, in retrograde himself in Gemini. Gemini is ruled by Mercury. So we have two rulers that are in retrograde, and they will be opposing each other multiple times during the cycle, both in detriment, which means that they're not in their strongest position. They're not functioning like they normally could. However, because of the fact that they will be opposing each other, and because they both rule the other sign, Jupiter rules Sag and Mercury rules Gemini, there's going to be receptivity, which creates a space of understanding between the two opposing energies. And that is going to make this opposition a little easier, because of the fact that there's understanding in those opposing forces, and that's a mutual reception. And that is going to allow there to be a resolve at the end of the cycle. especially after that last opposition takes place. We will also have a kite formation on the day that Mercury retrograde begins. So as that Grand Fire Trine starts out the Mercury retrograde cycle, later in the day, we're going to see a kite formation happen as the moon conjuncts the South Node in Libra. And so when you see a kite formation, it's a rare formation. It doesn't happen all the time, but it is known to be a fated connection. And so with the moon conjuncting the South Node in this formation, there's going to be a letting go of maybe some power struggles within relationships or some kind of dynamic in a relationship, maybe letting go of old emotions that you were holding on to within relationships or regarding maybe past relationships. It's supported though with that Grand Fire Trine. So it's, as we're, the moon and the South Node are conjuncting, we have the Grand Fire Trine supporting us to move forward. So you may find yourself maybe emotional or, a little sad because we're talking about the South Node conjuncting the moon. That could make you very emotional and kind of down and feel like you don't have a lot of energy or motivation. But with that Grand Fire Trine with Mars, the Sun, and the North Node, you're going to somehow get that motivation. You're going to be pushed forward, regardless of whatever may be coming up for you. And so I do like that formation. Take a look at where, the first few degrees of those signs hit in your chart, because that'll, if you have anything that is going to be conjuncting any of the points in that formation, that'll be very strongly emphasized during this time. So let's go through the timeline of Mercury retrograde, and I'll go a little deeper into some of the things that I've touched upon. I'm trying to be thorough about this without losing all of the information that I'm giving you, because there is a lot to consider. And it's not going to be an easy Mercury retrograde to navigate with so many different things that are going on in the background of the retrograde cycle. So, as I mentioned before, the Mercury retrograde begins on November 25th. However, Mercury began the shadow period on November 6th, when Mercury was at 6 degrees of Sagittarius. And so during that time when the shadow period began, there may have been communications or information that that popped up that will be getting revisited during this retrograde cycle. And when Mercury started the shadow period, Mars was opposing Pluto, okay? And so there may have been some conflicting or challenging situations occurring during that time, because with Mars opposing Pluto, when that shadow period began, it also squared Juno and Scorpio. And so there may have been the wanting to move forward, opposing what you're trying to end with Pluto at that last degree of Capricorn, and it causing some kind of challenge between what you're committed to and what your desires are. So take note of that. If anything popped up around that time, it is going to be revisited during the Mercury retrograde cycle in some way. On November 12th, Mercury was at 12 degrees of Sagittarius, making a square to Saturn at 12 degrees of Pisces. And during that square, you may have felt the need to break free. Mercury in Sag wants to be adventurous and wants to have freedom, and is very much a truth teller. There could be some way that you may have felt restricted, or that you may have wanted to break free from authority during that square. And you may have found a way to break free, whether it was you know, with Mercury, it's not just about communication and information, it's also about, you know, short distance travel. And with Saturn being in a square to it, you may have been restricted to your movement in some way. You know, maybe you were sick and you couldn't go out, and when that square happened, you may have said, screw this, I'm gonna find a way to get out of the house and you know, break free from being confined indoors, or whatever it could be. I'm just giving an example. And then we also see this square happen again during the Mercury retrograde cycle on December 6th, where Mercury will be at 13 degrees Sag and Saturn will be at 13 degrees Pisces. And then we'll see the third and final square happen on December 27th, where Mercury will be at 14 degrees Sag and Saturn will be at 14 degrees Pisces. So you can see something repeating with that square aspect between Mercury and Saturn, where, you know, you're being forced, you know, squares are challenging because they want you to find a way to resolve something. You know, squares cause tension, and that tension is meant to be worked through. There's something that you may need to compromise or kind of forge ahead through in some way. When we're talking about Mercury, who wants to move, Saturn, who's like kind of limiting things. So again, you may see a struggle during these three passes that Mercury makes that square to Saturn. Then we have Mercury opposing Jupiter. And the first time that this happened was on November 17th, when Mercury was at 18 degrees Sag, making an opposition to Jupiter at 18 degrees Gemini, who is also retrograde. And so during this time, information, communication could have been overwhelming. There could have been maybe exaggeration of things, whether it was exaggerated emotions or thoughts, or, you know, where you got caught up in your head, or there could have been too much going on at once, too many ideas, too many things to focus on, and not enough focus on one particular thing to resolve, you know, things in a more systematic approach. Because both being in detriment, Mercury and Jupiter, there is, you know, that challenge of both of them not functioning properly. And there's a need to look at the details and, you know, really take a step back with this opposition to see if if it really is necessary to allow things to overwhelm you, to look at the details a little more. Details are very much, you know, always the focus when we're talking about a Mercury retrograde cycle. But when you have the ruler of Gemini in opposition, there is a need to look at both sides of the coin. There's also, you know, a need to realize that two things can be true. You know, I heard another astrologer say this, and I was like, that's the perfect way to put this. And, you know, because Gemini is, you know, dual natured, and Mercury is mutable. And so two things can be true at the same time. And you have to decipher which is more important to you, you know, being right or allowing there to be two possibilities at the same time. And we will see this opposition take place again for the second time on December 4th, when Mercury is at 16 degrees Sag and Jupiter is at 16 degrees of Gemini. And then the third and final opposition will be on December 26th, when Mercury is at 13 degrees Sag, Jupiter at 13 degrees Gemini. And so we will see a repeat of those energies taking place during those times. You know, so we have the Mercury square Saturn happening 3 times between the pre-retrograde phase, the retrograde, and the post-retrograde cycle. And the Mercury opposed Jupiter happening 3 times as well. So there's this dynamic of, you know, and by the way, you know, Jupiter is very optimistic, you know, so there may be, during the Mercury opposed Jupiter oppositions, there may be a need to not be over optimistic about something and to keep a level head, to take a very balanced approach to what's going on. Not be pessimistic, but, you know, don't let your thoughts get away from you. There was something else I wanted to say and I already forgot it. But anyway, yeah, just keep a balanced approach with Mercury opposed Jupiter, because Jupiter can kind of overinflate, and there could be, you know, an over-promising, under-delivering kind of energy. Then as we move on through the retrograde cycle, Mercury will cazimi the Sun on December 5th, and this will happen at 14 degrees Sag. And so this could be highlighting information or communications that are very important that you need to pay attention to, especially because the next day, Mars goes retrograde at 6 degrees of Leo. And so it's as if, you know, that cazimi happens, there's something brought to your attention, and then Mars takes a step back and is like, wait a minute, I need to rethink how I'm going about things, or what my plan is, or what it is that I'm moving towards, or how it is I'm taking action towards something. And then on December 7th, we have the Sun in Sag opposing Jupiter. So the Sun opposing Jupiter could cause some, there's a couple of ways that this could play out. It could cause a little bit of disappointment, you know, because the Sun opposing Jupiter, it's like, I didn't want that to work out that way. Or there could be, you know, because the Sun is going to be receptive towards Jupiter, there could be something that comes up where Jupiter is asking for truth to be understood, and for you to honor not only your personal truth, but other people's personal truth. And they may be in opposition to each other. And this can also be, you know, with Jupiter is also about law and, you know, your spiritual beliefs, your religious beliefs, you know, how you define your, who you are at your core, you know, because Jupiter wants to bring opportunity and wants everything to be positive, and is a great benefic, as we all know. But Jupiter in its detriment, you know, it's going to be a struggle. So if there's some kind of legal situation taking place, this could be, you know, where it's hard to find a common ground for parties to come to a final agreement. Or there could be a need to retrace your steps or go back to the drawing board, because whatever you may have been hoping to agree upon needs to be edited in some way. And we also have Neptune turning direct on the same day, on December 7th. So Neptune is bringing clarity back to the table. And because Neptune was retrograding for months in Pisces, there was a lot of, you know, foggy air. We couldn't see things clearly, but we were also given an opportunity to reflect on dreams and visions that we had for our life, and what it is we want to create. So this way, when Neptune goes direct, we can see things clearly and refine those visions and those dreams and what it is we were imagining for ourselves. And this also could have been a time where there was confusion. And now with Neptune going direct, during this time, you know, confusion can be cleared up slowly when we have Mercury retrograde happening when Neptune goes direct. So it's requiring conversations to be had in order to clear the air, right? And on the same day, we also have Venus conjuncting Pluto at 0 degrees Aquarius. And so that alone is a powerful energy taking place. And I'm bringing it up because I want you to understand all of the background influences that are going on during the retrograde cycle. I'm a Gemini rising, so Mercury retrograde always has me tripping over my words, so I apologize. But we have a lot of influences that are going to be, you know, taking place during the retrograde cycle. And it's good to know, you know, all of the background, because it's not, you know, not every cycle is generically the same. I digress. On December 9th, we will see Mars make a trine to Mercury, or at least the trine will be beginning to build up, but it never perfects. So, you know, Mars and Mercury are coming to connect with each other within a few degrees. And, you know, so there's this ability to make a plan to move forward, or, you know, make a decision in some way, or, you know, implement something. And that trine never perfects. And I don't, you know, I pay attention to it to a certain degree when you see a connection start building up and then it never actually completely perfects. Only because when planets are within a few degrees of each other making connections, the influence is still there. But for those of you who are looking for more of that exact influence, it never quite completely perfects. And so that could mean that Mars and Mercury can find a way, but it may not be exactly the way we intend. There may be something that still needs to be tweaked a little bit. And I say that because as Mercury goes direct, you know, we still have another opposition to Jupiter that comes down the line. And when on the day Mercury goes direct, we have a full moon in Gemini, which is happening at 23 degrees of Gemini, which means that the sun will be at 23 degrees of Sagittarius. And the interesting thing is that essentially this is happening within a degree of where Mercury retrograde began. And that's why I said in the beginning that there may be a flip of or a change up of the story or of the plan, because of this full moon that is happening across the sky from where Mercury retrograde began. So there's something, you know, there's something that's changing. And these are mutable energies, so the change is to be expected. And then we see after that takes place, you know, on December 26th, Mercury makes a final opposition to Jupiter. And then on December 28th, the moon conjuncts Mercury at 15 degrees of Sagittarius. And then 2 days later, on the 30th, we have the new moon in Capricorn at 9 degrees. And then on January 2nd, Mercury is at 22 degrees Sagittarius, leaving its post-retrograde shadow. And as it's doing so, the nodes hit 0 degrees of Aries and Libra, which, as most of you already know, I'm sure, 0 degrees is an anaretic degree. 0 degrees is the beginning degree of a sign. And so as Mercury leaves the retrograde shadow area, we have the nodes going to a new beginning degree in Aries and Libra, getting ready to change signs themselves. So to try to encapsulate this, there's going to be, you may have seen, starting in the beginning of November, when the shadow period began, some kind of conversation coming up, some kind of information being brought to your awareness that is the topic of discussion during the retrograde cycle that needs to be revisited. We have Mars being an active player, making a trine to the North Node in Aries the whole time the retrograde begins, the whole time the retrograde cycle takes place. And we have that cosmic support to push forward, even through the challenges with Mercury squaring Saturn and Mercury opposing Jupiter. That trine that Mars is making to the North Node is still taking place during that square in opposition. And so, there's going to be challenges that come along with this Mercury retrograde cycle. But we're having that background support with Mars and the North Node. And, we have a cycle that begins a few days before a new moon in Sagittarius, the same sign that the retrograde cycles be in. And then it ends with a full moon in Gemini, completely across the exact point where the retrograde cycle began. So this new energy, these new conversations, or a new idea, whatever it may be for you, there are things that need to be worked out during the retrograde cycle. There's going to be, a little bit of push-pull dynamic, especially with Saturn causing maybe some delays, or maybe a need to restrain yourself a little bit. Maybe, again, with Mercury opposing Jupiter, if you're being overly optimistic, you may need to rein it back with that square to Saturn, right? Have a level head during this time. Look at the details, reread them, look at the fine print before you sign on the dotted line, all that typical Mercury retrograde stuff. But with all the other things that are taking place during the retrograde cycle, Mars being a key player, and it goes retrograde in the middle of the cycle. So as we have this new conversation, a new dynamic taking place, in the middle of the retrograde cycle, Mars now moves backwards. Still trining the nodes, but Mars starts its own retrograde cycle. And so, this very much could highlight something beginning that requires maybe a little more strategy, or requires you to be disciplined about how you're going about things. Mars and Leo can be very courageous and passionate, but when it goes retrograde, it's got to, control its passions and courage a little bit. And you may find that you may not voluntarily control that you may come across something that limits your courage and your passion. But with that trine to the North Node, you're going to have cosmic support to keep forging ahead. And when you have, Mercury in detriment in Sagittarius, there could be the possibility of, saying too much, or, wanting to do too much. And Mars going retrograde in the middle of the cycle may force you to, slow it down, and not overextend and, you know, overcomplicate things, especially when Mars eventually goes into Cancer. But for the purpose of this video, Mars will be in Leo during the Mercury retrograde cycle. So the overall picture is that there's something new being brought to the table, and movement is going to happen slowly between Mercury retrograde and then Mars starts the retrograde in the middle of the cycle. And you will see by the end of the cycle, things look completely different from where they looked when the cycle began because of that full moon. And I do believe, because Jupiter is involved, it'll be for the better. Even though Jupiter is retrograde, it's still benefic, and the energy between Mercury and Jupiter, even though they're not at their strongest, they're very receptive towards each other. They're able to find a way to make things happen between the two of them. And so I hope this helps you understand, you know, what you can prepare for during the Mercury retrograde cycle, because it is going to be one that has a lot of, there's a lot of nuances to it. But if you see the patterns that may have already started in the beginning of November during the pre-retrograde shadow period, you will get an idea of what you're going to be working through during the retrograde cycle itself. And, you know, this is something that is going to take time to, you know, come to a full picture, because Mercury doesn't leave shadow until right after the new year begins. So we have a good month ahead of us, a little more than that, of working through something, but working through something that is going to be long-term and is going to be for the greater benefit. It's going to be a new opportunity of some sort that you're going to be, you know, negotiating or discussing in some way. And I would say that the best way to get through this is to be cautiously optimistic. That is the best way to define this retrograde cycle. And if you can maintain that, it'll be easy for you to get through this. So take note of the degrees that I pointed out. See if it's lining up with anything in your chart, because if it does, that will be, you know, a strong signification of what's coming into focus during the retrograde cycle. And we have a lot to discuss as, you know, the month comes to an end and then December begins. There's a lot at play. And, you know, we have seen in so many different ways, cosmically, we're being pushed to, you know, end things that weren't working for us and to start something new that brings us into alignment. And this retrograde cycle is just, you know, it's like one of the first ways that we're getting pushed forward, because Sagittarius is very hopeful, very optimistic and positive minded. And, you know, with Grand Fire Trines going on in the background, we have that ability to keep going. And I love that for this cycle. And I think, you know, hopefully it won't disturb anybody's travels when it comes to being with family for the holidays, or at least it doesn't completely ruin your holiday plans. But brace yourself in case you are making plans to travel. Keep your schedule flexible. And I would say listen more than you speak during this time. With the opposition to Jupiter, I think that is probably the best way to get through those oppositions. So that is all I have to say about this Mercury retrograde cycle. I'm very excited for it myself because this is hitting my descendant, my sun, and there's a lot of connections to other things in my chart, and I find it very interesting that it's happening a few days before my birthday. So we shall see what this retrograde cycle brings for all of us. I can't wait to hear how it affects all of you guys. And stay tuned for more videos. Like I said, this is going to be a very busy week with Thanksgiving and my birthday festivities. So I'm not sure when I'll be able to put up the Sagittarius new moon video. I'm hoping I could try to tape it before all the end of the week festivities begin. But if not, please bear with me. It's going to be a busy week, and I hope you all have a great Thanksgiving with your families, and stay tuned for the next video. Take care, everyone.